You're listening to the Chelsey Holm podcast, where high-functioning Christian women come to lay down performance, pick up presents, and finally come home to who God created them to be. I'm Chelsey, the wife coach, mindset trainer, and your guide back to God-first living, soul-deep peace, and restored connection in your marriage, your motherhood, and identity. If you've been holding it all together on the outside while unraveling on the inside, you're in the right place. Let's breathe deep and begin.
If you are a woman who says, I can do it all myself, who struggles to receive help, who definitely doesn't ask for help, who says she trusts God, but as you listen to the rest of this episode, you're going to find out that you probably aren't actually trusting God. This episode is for you, so keep listening. Um, I've been going through the Sabbath study by Priscilla Schreier, and it was so interesting because at first I really struggled to get into it. I don't know if it's because it was a different format of a study or what, or it's not like the traditional, like read a passage and, you know, answer some questions through it to gain understanding. Like it's more of like journaling. And it, ironically, like I love journaling, but it was a challenge for me to get into it. And I'll tell you why. I think that was my flesh trying to pump the brakes on something that my spirit was leading me into that was so necessary for understanding that knowing and thinking I trust God is not actually the same thing as truly trusting the Lord. And the thing is, how we trust or don't trust the Lord translates into how we trust or don't trust our husbands. And I want to set the foundation for you because this is not about striving harder, it's actually about trusting deeper. And so if you go back to Genesis and you read about God creating everything, he rested on the seventh day. He didn't rest because he was tired, okay? He didn't rest because he was exhausted. He rested because he was creating, and rest was something that needed to be created for us. Now, I am a hard worker. Raise your hand if you can relate. I will work the pants off of the next best person, right? But resting was a struggle for me for so many years because I felt like I needed to prove myself. You know, if I rested, like that was actually lazy. And there were lots of reasons for this. One of the biggest was because I was rewarded for working hard. I was rewarded for doing well. I was accepted for those things. And I didn't truly understand rest and that God created it and that it was a gift for me. I just didn't understand. That wasn't something that I was exposed to. That wasn't something I saw other people doing around me. And I didn't realize how deeply the clause had gone from society's view of working and how this really is a lie perpetuated by society and is not God's way. And so God commanded rest, not just for our recovery, but actually for trust. And so if you look at Exodus 16:5 and 26, God told the Israelites to collect the manna for 6 days. And on the sixth day, they would still work the same amount of time. They wouldn't spend double the time collecting. Simply in their same effort, God would give them a double portion so they could rest on the Sabbath. So it was actually a call to obedience to trust him that he multiplied the efforts that they made on days 1 through 6 when they put their trust in him for that day seventh. That the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So I know that you should trust God, but it's probably likely you're still controlling outcomes. I just had this revelation just this week by doing this study. I'm telling you, this study is so good. Like, if you're someone who struggles to rest, you need to go do Priscilla Schreier's Sabbath study. Now, I will say it's one of the old school Lifeway ones where you have to buy the videos. I did it with, or I am doing it with a small group. So the church bought the videos and we watch them together as a group, but I think it's like $14.99. It's worth it. And you can find some of them on Facebook and YouTube, I think. Anyway, but all that to say, I am someone that who has really struggled to not rely on myself when it comes to business and work. And I had this revelation, this aha moment of, oh my gosh, I'm not actually trusting the Lord. And I'll tell you, this came about because I was listening to, um, I was listening to a podcast. I heard it mentioned on WBGL, like, Caleb? No, it's not Caleb. What is it? I can't remember. But anyway, I was listening to the radio, and they talked about this podcast, and I was like, oh, I'd like to hear that story because it was about this guy who used to be some version of atheist, and it was actually the near-death experiences that started him down this path that ultimately brought him to the Lord and launched him into this just ministry over his life, and included writing books and speaking, and actually I think he is the voice behind the Wow God Stories, which is another podcast. um but as I'm listening to this episode from this guy, he's talking about how he wanted to write a book, or he didn't want to write a book. I don't know. I should probably go back and listen to the podcast again, because now that I'm thinking about it, I'm like, okay, I don't remember all the details well enough to really retell it. But the whole point of me telling you this is time after time, when God wanted him to do something, he simply asked him to obey, and God provided the way to grow his business at every single turn. God provided to grow the business, the ministry. And so often in my life in business, right, the business world says if you don't go out and get it, you're not going to have it. He who works the hardest will be the most successful. Now, we've all heard, the early bird gets the worm and all of these sayings that drive us. And I have taken and invested in all the courses and the classes and the conferences of how to build a successful business. Okay. But in my journey of self-reliance and putting myself on the throne of trusting in myself to build the business, I have had to completely bring all of that mentality to a halt and start to dismantle it, because I'm building High Level Wife right now, and I shouldn't even say I'm building it. God is building it. I am being obedient to how he tells me to build it, how he provides the doors he opens. I have to simply walk through. I don't go looking for the doors. I don't go find the doors. I don't go knock on the doors. He is opening those doors so that I make no mistake that he gets the glory, not me. And so all of this to say, I had this realization that there are certain areas in the building of High Level Wife that I was still trying to control the outcomes, and struggling and rolling these things around in my brain of like, okay, I was asked to come, be a part of this women's conference. I could do this, right? Like, so should I make a list of all the local churches and see if they need a speaker for upcoming events, or see if they would allow me to host an event, right? And go knocking on doors. Now, does God call us to knock on doors sometimes? Yeah, he absolutely does. But in my case, in this situation, like in working with Tommy, the vision for High Level Husband and High Level Wife has been and will continue to be that we don't build businesses like the world does. God builds our businesses. We simply need to be faithful and obedient to the work that he has called us to and that he has us in now. And so if you are someone that knows you should trust God, but you're still controlling the outcomes, keep listening. Because there's a difference between belief and behavior. We know that faith without works is dead. We know that someone who comes to know the Lord and salvation has a natural response and overflow to want to go do the will of God. Jesus talks about this over and over. Like, to love the Lord is to do his will. we want to do his will. And so there's this disconnect between trusting the Lord and actually walking out what that trust looks like, or in my case, being still in the trust and not going out and walking and knocking on doors. So we need to understand this, that God simply calls us to obey. He doesn't call us to build the plan or to figure out what doors we should try to open. No. So, when we're thinking about this in your marriage, what would shift if you truly trusted God with your marriage?
Hey friend, if this conversation is hitting home and you're ready to stop surviving and start rebuilding, I want to invite you into my world of coaching. Whether you're navigating disconnection in your marriage, burnout in your body, or just craving something real again, I've got free trainings, tools, and one-on-one spaces to walk with you. Head to chelsey.coach/book your call or DM me the word call and let's figure out your next best step.
Well, I'll just tell you, if you peel back the curtains, it'll allow you to actually trust your husband, even if he's not in a place where he is following the Lord and leading as you think he should. Because even in that statement right there, you think he should, you are still trying to control. So the Sabbath is actually a mirror of trust. So God didn't suggest rest to the Israelites. He commanded it. And do you know why he commanded it? He commanded it because this was a people coming out of hundreds of years of slavery where rest was a completely foreign concept to them. They weren't allowed to rest. Rest was not something that they could do. And so God commanded them to rest so that they wouldn't return to slavery or the mindset of it. And so, do you actually trust Him to multiply what you laid down? Oh, think about that, okay? So, we trust God and we ask Him to multiply the efforts that we do, but do we trust Him to multiply what we lay down to Him with open hands? Right? We work for 6 days, but we trust the supernatural provision in the seventh. If you think back to our country, like, I don't know how many decades ago, but nothing was open on Sundays. Like, Sabbath was a much easier practice to implement. Whereas today, nothing is closed on Sundays, hardly at all, except for Chick-fil-A. And we always want Chick-fil-A on Sundays. Imagine that, right? Um, but it's interesting though, because if you look at Chick-fil-A, right, like it is a Christian-run company. They're closed on Sundays. They are more profitable in 6 days than most companies that are open 7 days, 24 hours a day. Like that's got to say something to you, right? But are we actually applying this? Not just knowing this in our head, but actually applying it in our obedience to the Lord. So are you trying to fix your husband in your own strength? Are you saying things like, we should start a Bible study together? That's not a bad thing to say, but if that's coming from a place of, I think you're not as spiritual as you should be to lead this family, and I am completely guilty of this over the years of our marriage, of trying to should my husband to death, and it doesn't create the space for him to actually lead. And I have to continually check my heart and my posture in all of these spaces, but especially in my marriage because of that, right? Like just because I am the obedient servant, the hands and feet and the voice behind high level wife does not mean that I perfectly walk out marriage. There are times when I need to continue to take ownership and come back and say, I did not approach that in a very godly way. And I apologize, I confess it as sin, and I repent of it. And then I move to restore unity and connection. So here are some ways that distrusting God is actually showing up in your marriage. Okay, get your notebooks out. Just kidding. Micromanaging, nagging, silent treatments, or self-protection. So if you can't trust that God is working in him, you will step in time after time and control him. Okay, micromanaging your husband, undermining his authority when it comes to parenting the children, nagging him into getting something done, right? Or just huffing and doing it yourself because he didn't do it in the time that you wanted him to do it, right? All of these are actually translations for how you're not actually trusting the Lord. Because because God has given you the husband that you have to lead your family on the mission that God has set in front of you guys. Um, so if you don't trust your husband to lead, how are you actually trusting God? And you can say that you trust God, but if you don't actually trust that God is working in your husband just as he's working in you and working in your family, it actually shows that you don't actually trust God. So peace is a byproduct of trust. So peace is the litmus test of how much you actually trust the Lord or not. So we live in an epidemic among moms and wives of worry. There are people that I know, there are women that I know that worry about worrying for somebody else who's not worrying enough. And it's insane to me because worry is always a sign that peace is lacking. And that translates to a lack of trust in the Lord, from the big things to the small things. I think a lot of times we can fall into this trap of, yeah, I trust God for the big things, but the little things are what keep you up at night. There were nights when I would lay in bed as a mom worrying about, did my kids get enough to eat? Did I feed them enough? Did I do, but the nights where I peacefully fall to sleep, like God's word says that God gives peace to those who love him and trust him. Like his children sleep in peace. Peace is the litmus test. It is the byproduct of trust. You can go read Isaiah 26:3 on that. So it all starts with trusting God before trusting our husband, because you're not actually going to trust your husband until you trust God with him. Did you hear me on that? Do you trust that God is working in your husband? Because he is. If your husband has the Holy Spirit, God is working on him. So it's not actually blind submission, it's surrendered trust. And surrender comes to opening your hands and laying down what the Lord is asking you to with a heart posture of, your will be done here. Your ways are better than mine. I trust in you. I lean on you, not my own understanding. So God is not asking you to trust a man's perfection, but his sovereignty over your story. Okay, your husband isn't perfect. Newsflash. I'm sure you already know that. I don't have to tell you that. I'm sure he already knows that and he doesn't have to tell you that. And you're not perfect either. And I shouldn't have to tell you that, right? But so often we put ourselves on this pedestal that we are holier than our husbands because our walk looks different than theirs. And so you need to remember, God is not asking you to trust your husband in the way that you think. But God's actually asking you to trust his sovereignty over your story and in that work that God is doing in him too, in your husband. So when you have internal peace, as I said, that internal peace is the byproduct of trust. When you have that, that leads to external obedience. So that's when we actually put our hands and our feet to the walking out of God's will. Okay, emotional safety in your marriage is going to grow when trusting God becomes your anchor. Now, this is an interesting topic because the world recognizes that anchor and peace in you, but they won't be able to describe it. This is why Paul could say I've been shipwrecked and starving and beaten and stoned and near death and also in abundance, and I am content. I have learned to be content in all things. This was him anchored into the Lord, into his trust in the Lord. Okay, your calm becomes a sanctuary your husband can respond to. My husband and I love to go to a little corner bar in town called the Corner Tap because they serve food all night long and it's not usually busy or loud. Some nights are loud and busy, and we try to avoid going on those nights. But I see so many men there just sitting at that bar drinking. And I've overheard conversations and even specifically asked people sometimes, like, why aren't you home with your family? Okay, maybe not like that rudely, but something along those lines. And the answer is always that there's no peace in that home, and this is where I go to relax, right? Our homes, wives, should be so peace-filled that our families cannot wait to get here, to walk across that threshold, to drop everything, including all the burdens that they've had, not on you, but at the door, because you are so rooted and anchored in trusting the Lord for all things that you are a place of peace for your family because you are rooted in the one who is your peace. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a practical application here. Try taking a daily audit. Where am I trying to control instead of trust? So you can think about this ultimately big picture as God. What and maybe not look specifically in the big things, but actually narrow it down to the smaller things. Where am I trying to control instead of trust the Lord for the small things, for the 6 days of working to receive that double portion multiplied for the seventh? And then let's talk about Sabbath rest. How can I embody trust in my weekly rhythm? Am I taking a day of intentional rest? Now, what we don't want to do is put a bunch of rules on ourselves for Sabbath of I can't do this and I can't do that, but instead focus on slowing down and refocusing your attention on the Lord, on His goodness, what He's done for you, what He's already brought you out of, how He's already provided, how He is the provider as a time to connect with your loved ones, to enjoy the blessings that He's given you, to feast, to delight, right? To enjoy the double portion. How can you start to embody that trust in your weekly rhythm? And then here's a challenge for you. Choose one area this week to stop striving and start trusting. Maybe that's in your finances. Maybe that's in your time for each day. Maybe that's in letting some things go, or maybe some bigger things of readjusting your priorities as a family. Maybe it's time to let go of those travel sports. Maybe it's time to limit your kids to one activity that they get to do per season. Maybe that's guarding your 1 day a week with your family, that there's no sports, no practices, no work those days. Now, it's interesting with work. Again, it's not a bunch of rules we put on ourselves. My husband loves to do yard work. It's kind of mindless tasks like mowing and things, and so that is part of how he does spend his Sabbath, and that is completely okay. Whereas I don't want to do work on Sundays. I want to sit on the porch in the sun or to spend time with my family or, um, spend time eating together, talking together, connecting, just hanging out. So what's one area this week you're going to stop striving, right? Stop trying to control the outcomes and start trusting. So Proverbs 3:5-6 says, to trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make your paths straight. So a simple test throughout your day is, am I trusting in my own understanding right now? Right? Am I trying to figure it out on my own? Am I trying to find the door to knock on, or am I simply giving myself enough space and margin in this life on my day to day that I can see the door that God is leading me to and asking me to walk through, and when He's asking me to walk through? And remember Exodus 14:14, the Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. It's so easy with this glowing rectangle, as I heard someone refer to constantly be inundated with noise and distraction, right? We could be listening to podcasts and books and music all day long, but where is the stillness? Where is the quiet? Where is the solitude? Where is the simply acknowledging God's presence and sitting with Him? Because we crave that intimacy with Him. So you're going to continue to struggle letting go of control in your marriage and actually trusting your husband if you're not really trusting the Lord, from the big things to the small things, from the working the 6 days and trusting that He brings the double portion from your previous work to that seventh day so that you delight and rest in Him.
Thanks for hanging out with me today. And remember, you do not have to become something else to be loved. You just have to return to who God already created you to be, deeply you. If this episode blessed you, share it with a friend or leave a quick review. It really does help other women find the hope and healing you just received. And don't forget, your marriage, your peace, and your joy, it's not too far gone. Nothing is too broken for God to redeem or restore. God's just getting started.